Fuck, it's horse beef here, and today I'm gonna be ranking nations based on how successful their fighters are in the UFC. Now, this is current as well, and a little prerequisite that I've used when choosing which countries to put in this tier list is you need to have at least like 3 active fighters in the UFC. That's it. I know it's not a lot, but yeah, certain nations, despite only having a few fighters in the UFC, actually do have some high ranked fighters. So I feel like certain nations that may be a little bit obscure should still be represented here, and I've done my best to include as many obscure ones as I could that actually make sense in the grand scheme of this tier list. You know what I mean? I don't know, man, but if you have less than 3 fighters on the UFC roster from your nation and it's not included here, don't get mad at me, man. Just step your shit up and start producing better fighters, more fighters that can get into the UFC. Don't get mad at me, all right? So starting off, we have Australia, and I think I'll put them right in A tier. No current active champions, but 2 of the best fighters in the UFC that currently aren't holding belts, being Robert Whittaker and Volkanovski. And then you even have somebody like Steve Erceg as well, who I rate quite heavily despite losing last time out against Kai Kara-France. So I think Australian fighters are beasts. They have, as I said, some of the best non-title holders in the UFC. So yeah, for me, Australia being at A tier is a no-brainer. At some point, I'm sure you could have confidently put them at S, but as things stand currently, A tier is the best I can do. Brazil, right into S tier. Multiple champions, Pantoja, Alex Pereira. And then you just have to look at the fighting nerds, all those fighters coming out of there, prospects like Jean Silva, Mauricio Rufy. I'm pretty sure he's a fighting nerd, isn't he? Who else? Cal Baralho. And there's one more that's slipping my mind. Gregory Rodriguez is another one. He's not a fighting nerd, but he's another Brazilian on the come up too. Man, Brazil just has so many top fighters in the UFC, unranked, ranked, prospects. I do think that Brazil will be one of those nations running mixed martial arts for some time to come. Like there was a little period recently, honestly, where Brazilians were kind of falling to the wayside a bit, but there's been this massive rise again, and Brazil 100% is at S tier. Canada, my home country of Canada, where I currently reside as well. Just gonna stick them right in D tier. They are producing no top contenders. Charles Jourdain has shown himself to be maybe not as high level of a prospect as we once thought. Barrialt is another fighter. Like he's good, I guess, but nothing to really be taken seriously as far as like a ranked opponent goes. Kyle Nelson, alrighty. I mean, we haven't really had anyone who's looked likely to challenge for a title since Roy McDonald and GSP, really. Elias Theodoro as well. Rest in peace to him. He actually was a family friend of mine, in case you guys didn't know, which you obviously wouldn't because I've never mentioned it. I wasn't too familiar with him personally, but he was a good friend of a cousin of mine, and I have ran into him a few times, and the man was just such a cool dude, and he played a massive part in marijuana being permitted to be used by UFC fighters. So, you know what, man, Elias Theodoro, he left his mark at the very least, but to be completely fair here, I have to put my home country of Canada in D tier. And then we get into England. Now I feel like England should be ranked at A tier alongside Australia. You do have a champion. I don't care that John Jones is holding the undisputed strap. That is absolutely a disputed strap because Tom Aspinall should be the undisputed champion. So you have that. Then you have some top ranked fighters like Arnold Allen. You have Paddy Pimblett on the come up too. Honestly, I don't think it requires much explanation. This right now is probably the best period that we've ever seen as far as English MMA goes. And I even forgot about Leon Edwards because he's just so boring. But he still is a top-ranked fighter. Is he even on the rankings anymore? I'm not even sure if he's a part of the rankings at this point, to be honest. So maybe he doesn't even apply. But then we get into Kazakhstan. Now, of course, Shavkat Rakhmonov is the poster boy for Kazakh fighters in the UFC. For good reason, of course. But then there's that dude that Umar fought on short notice. And there are a few prospects from Kazakhstan that are signed to the UFC, although just not enough. It's very top-heavy. It's Shavkat Rakhmonov, and that's pretty much all there is to it. So based off that alone, I think Kazakhstan C tier, but I think Kazakhstan will have a trajectory similar to what we saw with Georgia at some point in history. I think we'll see a lot of Kazakh fighters really coming up and doing well in the UFC in larger numbers. But then speaking of Georgia, we have Georgia right here, and I'm sticking them in A tier. They arguably even deserve to be an S tier. There just isn't enough Georgian fighters in the UFC, like besides Topuria and Merab, right? Both champions, which is honestly crazy to think about, because I can only think of Guram Kutateladze, Dolidze, and Giga. Those are the only other Georgian fighters I can think of, and even they're, I believe, ranked. All of them are ranked in their respective divisions, besides Guram, of course. And he's been exposed a little bit for having a bit of a shitty gas tank, but he's a great fighter in his own right. To be honest, like, technically, the man is really good. Really, really good striker. Just well-rounded fighter. I don't know. I like him. Dolidze I don't really rate, though. And Giga, I think, is a bit overrated and never was as good as we were led to believe early on during his rise. But the fact that you have not too many fighters in the UFC and 2 champions to go along with that is insane to me. If Georgia had just a few more fighters in the UFC doing well, right, in the rankings, in their respective divisions, I probably would have put Georgia at S tier. Arguably, they do deserve to be at S tier. So I want to put them at the very, 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 very top of A. I'm juggling with maybe sticking them at S tier, but I'm not too sure about that yet. And then we have China. I feel like China is perfect to go in B tier. You have a champion in Weili Zhang. Yan Xiaonan, again, right? Like, Chinese ladies have been doing very well, but the Chinese male fighters aren't as great as maybe some would have expected. Li Jingliang's coming off a brutal knockout loss to Carlos Prates. Oh my goodness. Song Kanan as well. I don't know. Really? I mean, I feel like they perfectly belong in B tier despite having a champion in the UFC, but it would not surprise me if China becomes like an A tier nation in the next 5 years or so, because as we all know, China is a sleeping giant. Okay? Oh man, France. Now they have their own card coming up this weekend, and there are some great French fighters. Imavov, Cyril Gane, Benoit Saint-Denis. I like France as a nation, and they are stepping their game up. Even some lesser known fighters like William Gomis is pretty good as well, man. I feel like France has a good roster of fighters competing in the UFC right now, so I'll put them at B tier. I think France is looking better and better as we go along. Ireland, I mean, we have Conor McGregor, who's technically on the UFC roster, I believe. Ian Gary. And honestly, I can't think of like Rhys McGee. I think Rhys McGee is an Irish fighter as well, I believe. It's just not enough, you know. There aren't a whole lot of Irish fighters, at least that any of us could name in the UFC right now. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm just ignorant. But I think Ireland should go down there with Kazakhstan. Because when you think about it, I mean, Conor McGregor doesn't fight. Ian Gary is probably he is the highest ranked fighter in the UFC from Ireland. And Shavkat will fucking clean him out, right? I don't know. I think they deserve to be on the same tier. And then we get into New Zealand. Now, they're not quite on the level of Australia, because it all depends on if you consider Israel Adesanya a New Zealander or a Nigerian. Nigeria will be on this tier list as well. So I'm going to be considering Israel Adesanya a Nigerian, not Chinese, nor New Zealand, because ultimately we've seen in recent months, years, that Izzy is very proud, or more proud of his Nigerian heritage than anything else. But I do think that there's a case to put New Zealand fighters at A tier, but I'm putting them at B. I don't believe that they have any champions yet. Kai Kara France, but if Kai Kara France is the best that New Zealand has to offer, then I can only put them in B tier, personally. And then we get into Jamaica, and I feel like there are some good fighters out of Jamaica. Ode Osborne put up a great performance at UFC Noche. Honestly, a very, very underrated fighter, I feel. Aljamain Sterling, Randy Brown as well. It's just not enough. And I fucking hate Aljamain Sterling as a fighter. So I'm putting him in C tier. Screw you. Japan, man, they're on the come up, dude. Rei Suraya, Rinya Nakamura, Tatsuro Taira. They're looking better and better and better. Have some future champs in my opinion, man, Tatsuro Taira and Rei Suraya in their own right, and Ryu Nakamura, those lighter weight classes, I believe will one day be ruled by Japanese fighters. I rate them. I'll stick them in B tier, right? Just for like the sheer amount of prospects that they have, like real promising prospects. I think Japan should be in B tier. Put them alongside China. Look at that. Just beautiful, beautiful synergy right there. Mexico. Some might consider Mexico to be a top nation. I'm not too sure I subscribe to that notion. No current UFC champions. Brandon Moreno, Yair Rodriguez, Lexa Grasso. Yeah, you have some good former champs in there. But I think as things currently stand, especially after UFC Noche, man, Mexicans got taken down a few pegs, except for my boy Marab, of course. Although still enough to be in B tier for me. Nigeria, I think similar placement is warranted. You have Kamaru Usman, Israel Adesanya, Sadiq Youssef that come to mind. Nazuchukwu, I think as well, if that's how you say his name. He's decent. But really, when you think about Nigerians in the UFC, you think about Usman, who's on a 3-fight skid, and Israel Adesanya, who's somewhat fallen off in recent fights. So I can't put Nigeria anywhere above B tier, and it's similar logic to the logic I used for putting Mexico at B tier, right? They had champions, although not anymore. And that needs to be taken into account, in my opinion. And then we get Poland, right? Marcin Tybura, Praknio, Jan Blachowicz. Okay, not bad, but very top-heavy. Jan Blachowicz is the major representative, and he hasn't fought for a little bit. I don't know. For me, and Mateusz Gamrot, but he just got beaten by Dan Hooker. I don't know how you're losing to Dan Hooker when you're Mateusz Gamrot. I'll put Poland in C tier. I think that's a fair placement. And then we have Russia. Say what you want about Russia, whether you are a fan of that nation or not. Who gives a shit? They have Peter Yan. They have the most dangerous man walking planet Earth at the moment, right? And then you also have Islam Makhachev. And honestly, Russians will always be at the top of the sport. It doesn't matter whether you hate their style or you don't. It doesn't matter, right? Fighters like Islam Makhachev will continue to pop up over time. There will be an Islam of the next generation, and they will keep getting better and better and better because Russians are just tough sons of bitches. They grow up in really rough environments, and that creates tough men. And yeah, Russians, I believe, as things currently stand, Brazil is actually ahead of Russia currently, right? You can argue with me in the comments if you'd like, but I actually believe that Brazil is number one right now in the UFC, but Russia is close behind as things stand. But yeah, of course, Russia has to be an S tier. If you disagree, then you're just wrong, man. You're just wrong. The U.S., at one point, they were 100% S tier, but as things stand, nope, they have to be firmly placed in A tier. 0 champions, although, of course, right, there are so many top-ranked fighters from the U.S. You have Sean O'Malley, who was just dethroned, and I'm honestly having a hard time. Oh, yeah, sorry, John Jones. So I guess USA does technically have a champion, but get the fuck out of here with that, man. It's Tom Aspinall. But despite all that, yeah, USA has to be in A tier, and there's not really an argument against it. And then we have Serbia. Now, Serbia is a decent nation. Rakic, Medic, other names that end with ich as well, but I have verified there are more than 2 fighters. I just cannot remember their names for the life of me. But Serbia, your biggest representative is Rakic. Not bad, but same logic as I used with Poland. And I think C tier is absolutely fair. And then last but not least, we have one that you may have not expected to be represented on this list, and that's actually Moldova. Does Moldova deserve to be down here with Canada? That would be super harsh because at least Moldova has some ranked fighters, right? Romanov, Spivak, Kutalaba, but he's not ranked, I don't think, unless Kutalaba would. Is he ranked? I have no idea. Let me know in the comments if Kutalaba is a ranked fighter. But I think just based off the fact that you have Romanov, Spivak, and Kutalaba, right? Decent fighters, decent names, 2 of which, at least I know for a fact, are ranked at heavyweight. You know what? Moldova, I think, deserves to find themselves in C tier. And man, I've really shit on my own nation of Canada, but I just have to be real, man. Canada does not produce enough high-level fighters. I mean, I've been to some gyms, and I've seen some guys in the gym, some real gym warriors, look great. Honestly, I'm just so surprised that some of these upcoming prospects around the Canadian scene just haven't made their way to the UFC, man. I don't understand what's going on there. I feel like at some point there needs to be a George St. Pierre regen, right, spawned within Canada. At some point, right, you'd expect that to happen, but let's just see how things go. But that is how I've ranked these nations. I feel like this one's not too controversial, right? Maybe the placement of certain nations may be controversial, especially if any of you guys in the comments are from a country like Serbia, Moldova, Poland, Jamaica, whatever. You may be offended by my placement, but just be objective and don't be quick to outrage, and just look at my placement from an objective standpoint, truly. And you shouldn't have too much of an issue with where I've placed these nations. But anyway, guys, I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you on the next one.